Hi there, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today we have a off-season trade special. We're going to be evaluating some of the possible trades heading into the 2020 off-season. We believe that it will be a short off-season. There's been rumblings about the NBA starting very soon as Christmas time. So, just looking at some of the trades that might happen in this rapid little off-season that we would have. So for the first one, we're taking a look at the LA Clippers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the Clippers definitely need a point guard going into next year. They need another playmaker. So they are acquiring the services of Chris Paul. The Thunder would be getting back Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverly, Rodney McGruder, and Mifundu Kabengele. Um, they are also acquiring 2022 second round pick, 2023 second round pick. And I think this trade makes sense for both sides. Obviously, the Thunder would be getting a nice young player in Montrezl Harrell, reigning sixth man of the year player. Oftentimes, you do not find that kind of caliber player available. He very well could average for the Thunder next year over 20 points per game. This past year, I believe it was 19. Patrick Beverly is obviously he's a dog. He is overpaid, however. This is primarily to match money. Rodney McGruder is another match money guy. He's making about $5 million a year for the next 2 years. And Kabengele was a first-round pick. He was picked, I believe, 21st overall by the Clippers. It's been hard for him to kind of establish and carve out a role with guys like Patrick Patterson, JaMychal Green, kind of all in the rotation ahead of him. He's been going back and forth between the main roster and the G League, and he's done pretty well in the G League during his time there. So they get another first-round caliber player along with this. The Clippers don't have a lot of first-round picks to kind of give up. However, they are getting an established player with Montrezl Harrell. They get another potential trade chip in Patrick Beverly, who they can flip somewhere else if they want to match money with something, or if they want to just get an asset for a team that is contending. And Kabengele is obviously a guy that Oklahoma City would have to like in order for this trade to work out. And the reasons are obvious for the Clippers why they need Chris Paul. So that is my first trade. Sheldon, why don't you give them the first trade you carved up?
Yeah, the first one I brought in here was a trade between the Denver Nuggets and the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, the Nuggets just came off of a really, high achieving year, and they're looking to really become a contender year in, year out. And I think a way that they'll see that happening would be acquiring Drew Holiday. And I think Drew Holiday will be one of the players that does get bid up on quite a bit in this offseason, especially in the short amount of time. I think he's going to be one of the players that many teams feel safest to go and acquire, and has been kind of on the market for the past almost year now, pretty much since February in 2020 here before the season got locked out. And I think the Nuggets here would be really best suited to grab Holiday in order to kind of fit that identity, and they get a guy who can score 18 to 20 points a game without needing the ball in his hands, really functions well as a secondary playmaker. And him coming in next to Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic wouldn't affect the way that they already play offensively, but give them, a third scoring option, and also a guy who can run the offense when Murray goes out, something they badly need. In this trade, the Pelicans would be getting Gary Harris, who some see as a negative contract in this point. And for me, he's just really a filler here in money. And they'd also be acquiring Monte Morris, who will be expiring after this year. Monte Morris, some people believe he has potential to be a starting level point guard. I think he'd kind of come in for New Orleans and really fill in as that backup point guard role. And in addition, they get pick 22 this year, which initially belonged to the Houston Rockets, and also a top 5 protected 2022 first round pick from the Denver Nuggets. Here, the Pelicans are taking, a more elongated route to their success and kind of pushing off their roster for a couple of years here, especially with how stacked the West is. What do you kind of think here on this trade, Austin?
I think it makes a lot of sense with the money matchers that you have here with Gary Harris and Monte Morris. Obviously, Gary Harris isn't really viewed as much as an asset as he once was under his rookie contract. It does make sense for the Nuggets to do this because I do think that this truly makes them a better team. Obviously, having Drew Holiday gives you a lot of versatility defensively. and he is a very, very good player overall, having that secondary playmaker, like you said. I think that's a great trade for both sides, to be quite honest with you. And it's just going to be interesting to see how the Pelicans would, if they would pay Monte Morris, if they're going to let a team like the Knicks try to pay him.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely one of the bigger questions. And I think the Nuggets will see the writing on the wall there, which is why they're willing to give up Morris here. But it would be interesting to see how the Pelicans value Harris and Morris here in this trade back. I believe you had a Drew Holiday trade as well, Austin, if we want to transition into that one right here. Take it away.
Yeah, so for this Drew Holiday trade, it's going to a team that's very young already. I think Atlanta needs to do this just as a maturity movement. He's not a guy that you're gonna have to wait to develop. You can already have a surefire thing right next to Trae Young, and with Capella and John Collins, you're trading away Dwayne Dedman as a money matcher. Not exactly money matching for him, but that's $13 million that will be going back. Cam Reddish, who's a player that people view as an asset still, obviously, and same goes with Fernando. They're also acquiring a 2022 first round pick and pick 50, and also 2021 second round pick from Miami. So they're getting a couple of draft picks back. They're getting a young player with a little bit of upside, if you still believe he does have some, in Cam Reddish and Fernando. So I think this makes a lot of sense for the Hawks, who honestly could use some maturing. I think they have too many guys that are in the mix that are just young pieces. Obviously, we've seen teams like the Celtics kind of have that, where they just have a lot of young guys in the mix, but there's not always enough room for them all to play together. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Atlanta, and they might be taking Isaac Okoro in the draft, who's very similar to Drew Holiday. Not nearly the player right now, but they could also be looking to take him during the draft. So I think this makes a lot of sense for both sides. Obviously, the Pelicans are going for a youth movement, and they're going to continue that with acquiring more picks and getting Cam Reddish.
Yeah, I definitely love this trade as well for both sides. Looking at the Dwayne Dedman part of this, usually Dwayne Dedman, just obviously like you said, is a money filler here, but I actually really like his fit with the Pelicans. He's got some ability to stretch the floor. I think he could really play the 5 position next to Zion Williamson, something that I didn't really like the fit of Derek Favors or Jackson Hayes this past year. So I think Dedman can kind of fill in that starting center role here for a year for them, and I think Cam Reddish is a guy who as a shooting guard could give them a lot of potential behind JJ Redick, because right now Redick is obviously getting up there in age. They don't really have a true backup shooting guard. Josh Hart has been playing that minutes, but he's, Josh Hart's kind of at where his ceiling is going to be in the NBA as an impactful role player probably. So I think Cam Reddish is enough upside here to sell the Pelicans, and also that 2022 first rounder via Oklahoma City. We've already talked about Oklahoma City once in this video, and we see them as a team that could potentially be retooling and rebuilding, and that pick could become a lottery pick very easily in 2022. And I think that could be a very valuable asset for a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, who kind of got their core set and would be able to use that pick later in trade discussions. Moving on here to another trade we have is actually around Chris Paul again. Here we got Chris Paul going to the New York Knicks, and the Thunder this time are acquiring Dennis Smith Jr., Bobby Portis on his expiring $15 million, Taj Gibson on his expiring $9 million, and a Dallas Mavericks 2021 first round pick from the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Obviously, with the Mavericks, they have been a very, very strong team, and that pick will likely be in the 20s. So that's why the Knicks will be willing to move on from that pick here. Portis is a guy they're probably going to let go after this year anyway. Taj Gibson, likewise, and Dennis Smith Jr. doesn't really give a lot of value here. And the reason that the Knicks are interested in giving up these players in this, as well as they're able to maintain their max salary slot next to Chris Paul, and perhaps go out and bring a free agent and really try and build that infrastructure up in New York. Try and really, build a winning culture there with Tom Thibodeau, Chris Paul, and then, player X through free agency this year. Or even make a run at a player like Nikola Vucevic. Whether or not that's a great move long term, it would be yet to be seen, but it would definitely make them more competitive now, which I think they have a lot of interest in doing with Tom Thibodeau as their head coach. And for pretty much no long term cost, Dennis Smith Jr. has been very, very shaky after leaving Dallas. Bobby Portis doesn't really fit into their long term plans. Neither does Taj Gibson. And a late first rounder in 2021 from the Mavericks won't be too valuable either. And I think that the Thunder are, interested in getting this deal done simply to get off Chris Paul's contract, especially if the trade that we presented earlier in Montrezl Harrell doesn't want to go to the Oklahoma City Thunder and doesn't, sign there initially. Starting that sign and trade, I think this would be one of the better options for the New York Knicks and the Oklahoma City Thunder at that point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think more than anything, this is a culture change for the New York Knicks. Obviously, Chris Paul's the guy that likes to rally his team. We saw that with the Thunder this year, a team that did not have very many expectations going into the season. Chris Paul played a lot better than I think we all expected. I think this would be great for the Knicks, kind of jump-starting their team at a very low cost. Obviously, that first-round pick is not going to be a high pick, considering the Mavericks are perennial contenders here on out. Obviously, you're buying a little low on Dennis Smith Jr., which is a great thing to do if he's able to kind of turn things around. I think for the Thunder's sake, that makes a lot of sense as well. But I like this trade definitely for both teams.
Yeah, let's move on here to the next trade we have. And I was actually playing around with a lot of Victor Oladipo, Buddy Hield trades too. Austin, take us through what you got here between the Kings and Pacers.
Yeah, so the idea of this is you have two guys that are kind of disgruntled, and let's just flop their spots here. And we're going to send Victor Oladipo to the Kings. Hopefully, he likes to play alongside De'Aaron Fox. You get him in a new home. You know that the Kings might be willing to pay him. You're not exactly sure. They were willing to pay Buddy Hield at one point here. So I'd like to see the same for Victor Oladipo. And Buddy Hield does not want to be in Sacramento anymore, so he goes to an already very solid Pacers team. You have quite a few players around him in Indiana. I think this trade makes a lot of sense. The Pacers are also acquiring the 43rd overall pick just to kind of sweeten the deal just a little bit. I think almost a straight up would work, but I think maybe Indiana might want just a little more, considering that they probably think Oladipo is better than Hield all around. So that's kind of the idea behind this. You get two disgruntled stars or near stars that would be flopping spots. And I mean, they play the same position. I think it makes a lot of sense, definitely for both teams. And Sacramento can feel like they got a pretty good deal on a guy that wants absolutely nothing to do with them anymore.
Right. On a business side, I really like this for Sacramento. Not only moving on from a guy that has been vocally desiring to leave your city and your franchise, but you also bring in a former All-Star guard that kind of puts a lot of pressure on Bogdan Bogdanovic and kind of gives you the upper hand in negotiations this offseason with him. Because otherwise he could be a player that, is wanting 16 to 18 million that quite frankly is probably closer to the 10 to 13 million dollar range. And acquiring a former All-Star would, kind of send that message that you're not going to be willing to overpay for his services to stay in Sacramento. And for Indiana, I absolutely love the fit of Buddy Hield there. Next to Brogdon and next to Sabonis, I think that you adding a real perimeter threat and a guy who can get his shot off on his own out on the perimeter, next to guys who are already very, very dangerous in the pick and roll game, would be very, very good for Indiana. I think that he actually fits in there better than Victor Oladipo does currently with their roster makeup. And I think that both teams see a lot of upside in this trade. Moving on to what I believe is our final trade here. We have one more Chris Paul trade. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors around him. He's due $85 million yet in his last 2 years with the Thunder. Part of the reason why the Thunder would be so willing to move on from him. And here we have the Milwaukee Bucks swinging big for Chris Paul and trying to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo after this season, especially if he does not ink that Supermax extension this offseason. Chris Paul to Milwaukee makes a lot of sense for them. You get a true creator out on the perimeter, and in this trade, they're only giving up Bledsoe, Hill, DJ Wilson, and pick 24. And they're also acquiring a 2023 lottery-protected first-round pick from Miami back as kind of consolation for Chris Paul's age and some of the quality of players they're giving up. Eric Bledsoe would probably end up getting rerouted at some point following this trade. But I think the writing's on the wall for Milwaukee. Eric Bledsoe doesn't quite fit into what they need to be doing in the playoffs. I think that an improvement to a more pick and roll dominant guard like Chris Paul would really suit them well. And the cause for that is pick 24 and giving up George Hill, who's obviously an important role player for them. But to get to the money, that's what they'd have to do here. And DJ Wilson is just a throw in here in his last year of his rookie deal to match the money. What do you think here on the Bucks Thunder swap?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the Bucks are desperate to make a move, make a splash to try to cater to Giannis, and I think like you said, a player like Chris Paul, a point guard like Chris Paul that can operate the pick and roll, and he's definitely an experienced guy in the playoffs. He's a go-to guy during crunch time if you need him to be. He's played a lot of big games in his career, so I think it makes a lot of sense from the Bucks perspective. And also from the Thunder perspective, like you mentioned, the $80 million over the next 2 years, that's kind of a whopping number for a small market team like Oklahoma City. And really, they're planning on tearing it down, I believe. And there's a couple of key players on their way out. So I think for both sides, this makes a ton of sense to get done.
Yeah, I believe that was our last full trade we had mocked out. Now we're just going to move on to a few talking pieces here, some players that could get traded. We're kind of iffy on some of these guys here, but the first one is the big ticket of the offseason of the Washington Wizards, Bradley Beal. Some rumors have been that teams like the Brooklyn Nets would be interested. And quite frankly, almost every team in the league would probably be interested if he did become available. What do you see on Bradley Beal this offseason?
Yeah, Bradley Beal, unfortunately, I don't think that they're going to want to move on. I think they're going to want to try to run it back with John Wall and Bradley Beal on the team. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Bertans, if they're going to try to retain him to try to compete in the East, which obviously they can do with the two guys I mentioned prior. I think that Washington's going to be a little too high on their asking price, and I don't think any team's going to get to the point where they give up a massive package for him like Washington might expect. So I think they're going to try running it back and rekindling the old flames of 2016. We'll kind of see how that goes for them. I think they're gonna realize after this year that it's not enough to truly compete. However, it's kind of an interesting idea and talking point to figure out where Bradley Beal would go. I just don't know if it's realistic that he does get moved.
Yeah, Beal, they do have team control on for 2 years yet before he can opt out this next season and then the year after. And then he does have an opt-out clause at that point. Prior to that, the only team I think this offseason that could potentially make a run at Bradley Beal would be the Golden State Warriors. As surprising as that sounds, they have pick 2. They have the Wolves' top 3 protected pick that goes unprotected in 2022. And they have Andrew Wiggins to perfectly match the money here. That would be kind of the framework of the deal. They'd probably have to throw in more because of how some teams view Andrew Wiggins' contract. And I think that the Golden State Warriors would have the best chance to pull it off. But I, like you had mentioned, I don't think the Wizards are in any state to really be considering those. I think that they're going to view Beal as a superstar and will try and keep him there in Washington as long as possible. Moving on to a player that was viewed as a former superstar, Blake Griffin of the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, not long ago, he signed that super huge extension with the Los Angeles Clippers before getting traded to Detroit. Now at this point, only has 2 years left on his deal, around $90 million worth. Do you see any suitors for Blake Griffin, especially buying low on the margins here?
Yeah, I mean, I think a team, it's very hard because of that staggering number in the next 2 years with him. I don't know if there's any team that I believe there are suitors for him. I'm just not exactly sure where he'd for sure be able to work out and where the money would work, but I think it's unlikely he gets moved. Maybe next year when it's just 1 year left on his deal, but right now I don't see anything really happening with him.
Yeah, there's not a lot of teams that would really be motivated to go out and get a Blake Griffin at this point that will have the cap space, especially with the potential rumors that cap space could be lowering going into next season too after the coronavirus issues this year that postponed the season for a while. So I think Blake Griffin will likely stay put. He is an interesting name to be considering though. And another former All-Star and All-NBA player, Kevin Love for the Cleveland Cavaliers, has seemingly been in every single trade rumor discussion for the last 3 years or so. What do you see on Kevin Love, and is there any potential for him to get moved?
Yeah, once again, same thing with Blake Griffin. These fours that just aren't, they've already peaked. It's not looking good for Kevin Love to get moved either. I feel like Cleveland would be highly motivated to move him right now. The same thing with Blake Griffin in Detroit, but I just don't know if there's really any suitors. You had mentioned to me earlier Portland, that might be a possible destination, but I just don't know if they would really be willing to do that, knowing what we know now about Kevin Love. And I think he's a really tough player to try to move once again.
Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a routine here with the fours in the league. That Griffin and Love really aren't the rim protectors you need to have them play the 5 position, and they kind of struggle out in space defensively out on the perimeter. So I think that they're kind of hard players for a team to really buy into, especially on the defensive end of the floor, just because of their lack of versatility. Night in, night out, I think is kind of limiting in a lot of ways. And for them to get moved, I think it'd be a really, really cheap package, like a future second round pick and cap filling situation, which quite frankly, a lot of teams don't love to hear that when you're shipping guys who are former All-Stars. Now, we've already talked about him a little bit this podcast. Victor Oladipo, what do you see on Oladipo? Do you think the Pacers are going to move on from him? And what do you think his market would look like?
Yeah, I think he's definitely going to get moved this offseason. They do see the writing on the wall. And when you're a small market team like Indiana, not often do you land free agents. So I think you're going to try to get whatever you can for Oladipo. Like in my prior trade, I think they would like to leverage him and try to go get a Buddy Hield or some kind of guaranteed player that is locked in for the long term. So I think the Buddy Hield thing probably makes the most sense to me. Like Brooklyn's another interesting one, like we'd mentioned. Yeah, there's a couple teams that definitely could use him. I think a deal will get done this offseason for Victor Oladipo.
Yeah, he's been thrown around in a lot of different things. I've been hearing some rumors about him going to Dallas potentially in a Oladipo Hardaway swap with the Mavs giving up pick 18. Personally, I don't love that for the Mavericks. I think that Oladipo doesn't fit quite as well next to Luka as Hardaway does offensively. And paying to go get him into his last year of his deal, I think would be a little detrimental for the Dallas Mavericks. I think he also is one of the harder players to kind of find, true value for, because 2 years ago he was an all-star, and that maybe is how Indiana still views him. But in the last year and a half, he hasn't really been that. He's really struggled with injuries, and he's going into the last year of his deal, which makes him a little bit more of a risk to go acquire, especially if he plays well and you have to pay him at the end of the season. That I think will be some of the harder points in trade talks for him, but I do think it's possible that he gets moved. Especially to a contending team, possibly the Los Angeles Lakers as well, would be a team to watch, in my opinion. Moving on to a team you had mentioned surrounding Victor Oladipo, the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, they have a lot of trade chips around Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, such as Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen, and Joe Harris is an unrestricted free agent this offseason that they will probably have to pay upwards of $13 million a year to keep. Do you see the Brooklyn Nets making a move to upgrade their core, especially their starting lineup, or do you see them rolling it over with their depth with new head coach Steve Nash?
Yeah, the one really hard thing about the Brooklyn Nets is there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know how Kevin Durant, Kyrie, and this crew, function together. We have a new head coach coming in. There's a lot of new things about this team. I think that they might make a move, try to make a splash here, get one more guy. Like I had mentioned, Victor Oladipo is an option. Drew Holiday is an option. I think that they might go make a move. I think that they're going to kind of package guys like Dinwiddie, LeVert, and Allen to go get that quote third star. Whether it is a true third star or not is yet to be seen. However, I think that they will go and make a move and really go push all their chips on this year. And obviously, Kevin Durant's not getting any younger. Who knows after his Achilles injury how he's going to play. So I think they're going to go all in on a third star.
Yeah, I definitely think that is their goal this year. I think perhaps one of the things that will hold them back from doing so is Bradley Beal. I think that they secretly want Bradley Beal the most out of all these possible players. I think Drew Holiday would be a good fit in Brooklyn, as well as Victor Oladipo, like you mentioned. But I think to them, I think that they believe they have enough trade chips to go out and get Bradley Beal. And obviously we had mentioned that we don't think the Wizards will be ready to do so. So the Wizards' reluctance to move on from Beal might hold back the Nets' willingness to trade some of their chips in hopes that down the road they could get Bradley Beal. But the clock is ticking. They have an older average roster age than they did, obviously, 4 or 5 years ago after the addition of Kevin Durant off of an Achilles tear. and Kyrie Irving isn't super young anymore. And, their window starts now, and I think that they should be cognizant of that. But at the same time, I think Bradley Beal is quite the option that they'll want to wait for if they can. So they'll be an interesting team to monitor through this offseason. Obviously, you have quite a few trade assets and kind of might be the driving force behind what moves happen and don't happen this year. And that'll conclude our episode here for the offseason trade rumors and potential. Let us know in the comments down below who you think will get moved and who you don't think will get moved. Thanks for watching to this point, and we'll see you in the next video.